Afternoon, AK. Back again, episode 4. How are you, my friend?
I'm good, MJ. How are you? How's Melbourne?
It's all right. A couple of hours from now, I'll be able to taste sweet, sweet freedom in a tiny little bit. But anyway, that's all right. Fingers crossed, yeah. But mate, once again, back at it. Another episode of TechBox. What have we got in store for today?
So today, we are going to retrieve data from, surprise, surprise, Salesforce. So last time we were pushing data, this time we're actually fetching data from Salesforce to pre-populate information in checkbox forms. And particular use case I sort of came across that I'm using for this particular demo is essentially generating a partner agreement and getting information about the other party.
So going back to that age-old thing that we've been talking about for the last little bit, that double handling of information, and more importantly, eliminating that, pulling that information from our system of record, and as you said before, surprise, surprise, we're pulling it from Salesforce, but this could be substituted with Dynamic CRM or insert your CRM system that has API connectivity to then automatically populate that. Mate, compelling use case, really, really interesting. Mate, let's jump into it and have a look at it.
Cool. So as I mentioned before, essentially what we're looking here is it's a demo we built for one of our clients in the health industry in the United States. Essentially, as part of sort of partner programs, selling medical products. Their partners tend to be doctors. We're actually reselling them. So someone in the sales team can go in and sort of generate a partner agreement without needing to go to legal and get them to draft the agreement. And so essentially as part of the process, oftentimes you actually are signing the agreement with an existing partner or like renewing an existing agreement. So essentially you're just using exactly the same information about that party. And so in this case, essentially we have a register of existing clients from which we can fetch the information based on some sort of a unique identifier. In this case, we use just their name. Probably a better practice is to use some sort of an ID, like this contact ID we have on the left-hand side. And instead of forcing your user to be sitting there typing away, wasting their time, we actually save them time by fetching this data and make sure the data is always the most relevant, up-to-date data from a single source of truth.
It could be any unique identifier or a unique identifier for information. It's just as long as we pull that information, we can start seeing, and we use James, our fearless leaders example here, we can just pull name, email, account type, and all those other objects or other fields from other systems to then just instantly pre-populate that checkbox form. Is that correct?
Exactly. So in this case, we have some sort of a contact object in Salesforce. And once we find a match with someone, as you pointed out, who has like slightly strange resemblance to our CEO and co-founder's name, James, we can pre-populate all the other relevant attached information. Let me actually show it to you in action. Yeah. So just a sort of small blurb as usual to explain what this particular tool is doing. And on the next page, I can provide the company name, which actually is not really involved in integration. So let's call it something like Doolittle Doctors Pty Ltd. And doctor's name, here's where we're going to use James Fan as our sort of lab rat to test the integration. So when I hit next, an API call is executed, and then data is fetched from Salesforce based on that sort of a match of the name. And all the relevant information that we've just seen on that register is pulled across and pre-populated in the form.
Very cool. And once again, you haven't had to type a single piece of information into this doctor's information. We're just referencing those APIs from Salesforce to populate the full name, the email, and all those other pieces of information that we see throughout this form.
Exactly. And to make things a bit more interesting, let's actually do something and go back into our register and pretend that our Dr. James Fan, in the meantime, has moved to another address. Instead of 8842, they moved to 1234 Green Top Road, Lincoln. Right, let's save that. And imagine that someone is generating a partner agreement now after the record has been updated we would actually hope that the most up-to-date relevant information is being pulled through. So let's say again, do little doctors, and doctor's name is again James Fan. And so what we're going to hope for on the next page is that actually we get the most up-to-date data from Salesforce, and the address has been updated. So that address field, you can see here 1, 2, 3, 4, and similar can be with any other piece of information on this page.
So really, the outcome here is we're not having to, once again, put information into the form where we don't necessarily need to, but it's also pulling the most up-to-date information at the time that you go through and start the form. So we're always referencing up-to-date information.
Exactly right, exactly right. So you have your single source of truth, Salesforce, or any other CRM, as you mentioned, that supports API connectivity, from which we get information at a particular point in time.
Cool. Now, mate, it wouldn't be called TechBox if we didn't look at some of the tech, and we haven't been looking at it the way that we should have been doing it for the last couple of episodes. So, mate, I know that there are a few things that we want to see within the text, within the studio for Checkbox, and there's a little techie treat that we have in store as well, don't we?
Yes, exactly. You see through me, mate. I was actually planning to show you a little bit what is happening behind the scenes. So in a couple of last episodes, we've been showing sort of the end user experience, but actually see what the application builder is seeing behind the scenes. So here, essentially, you can see a graphical representation of a workflow that we went through, our start page, the form where we captured the doctor name, and this little orange block called JavaScript that is actually does all the hard work in terms of facilitating the API integration. So if I click into it, there's essentially three main parts of it. You can see there is a JavaScript type file attached to this JavaScript block. This is essentially where that code is sitting that executes a REST API call to Salesforce. Another section here is input variables. So essentially on a JavaScript block, you can configure which input variables from the Checkbox workflow you wish to pass into the JavaScript block. And in this case, the most important one is the doctor name that we provided on the page 2 that is used to actually execute query in Salesforce and return relevant information based on the match. And then another one is essentially a login. So the user who is interacting with the workflow will use it for authentication with Salesforce. And as you will see in a couple of minutes as well, we are leveraging some of our, so we store all the secrets and environment variables and leverage them for added sort of security so that they don't need to be stored somewhere when someone can sort of maliciously access them. They're only available to your administrator and can also be hidden and protected. So no one ever sees them unless you need to sort of recreate.
Perfect.
And on the second section here, our third section here, essentially you can see the output variables configured. So once you execute that piece of JavaScript code and you find that match in Salesforce, you return all the relevant other data back into Checkbox, which is the doctor ID, email, address, state, and things like that we've seen on the third page as we're progressing through the workflow.
So this is where the outputs that we're seeing here, this is where we're removing that double handling of information. This is where the JS will go through, pull that information and populate it on page 3 for us. Or in your instance, you made the update to James's address, it's gone through and pulled that information again to pre-populate page 3 with all those details.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Awesome. Now, mate, once again, let's get into that little techie capability here. Let's actually that get capability that we've seen in practice, but not necessarily in the back end. So let's get techie. Let's get into the TechBox side of things, mate.
Exactly. Sure. So now we're gonna look not just behind the scenes, but behind the scenes. So let me share the code that is actually attached to this JavaScript block. And so lo and behold, this is the JavaScript code that is responsible for executing the API integration. And you can see at the top, these are the input variables that we've seen a couple of minutes ago on the JavaScript block. So here's our doctor name that is used inside of the code to make that sort of matching of the relevant doctor name.
Yeah.
and the login that is required for authentication, and a couple of things that come through from the environment variables. So the password, security token, and things like this, which allows us to store them securely. As we scroll down, just sort of the typical structure of a Salesforce API integration, the authentication part, and an actual get call itself. So you can see what we're doing here is a little bit of SQL querying using the Salesforce sort of supported language to find relevant pieces of information based on a name match for the doctor that we've provided before. And then the output variables that we saw in the output variable section as part of the JavaScript block that are actually coming back into Checkbox and are pre-populated on that form that we've seen at the end to remove the double handling of data, to save our precious user time typing this stuff away.
Perfect. And that's pretty much what we want to focus on, this little part here where we're capturing that information and you're not having to double handle anything.
Exactly right.
Perfect. All right, mate. Just wanted to jump back into the studio just for a moment. I do have a question that a few of the keener eyes who might be watching along with this series might have a question regarding. So let's jump back over there and let's start wrapping things up, mate.
Absolutely.
All right, so back in the studio, mate, we're seeing some different colors to those blocks. Now, I can see black, I can see a teal, an orangey yellow, a blue. What do these all mean?
Awesome question. So essentially, it's a really good way to represent to our application developer what sort of particular functionality are we using as part of the workflow. And so the teal ones are essentially your end user facing screens or blocks. So this is the form that we've seen a couple of minutes ago where we typed in that information. And you can see there's all the other tools to sort of capture data from the user, like dynamic tables, dynamic lists. And then the orange blocks are essentially things that are happening behind the scenes. So something that user actually doesn't see and something we don't necessarily want the user to see. And JavaScript essentially is in that category. Yep. So the user doesn't see anything. They don't have to see the code, which will confuse them, which we don't want them. But the integration is happening behind the scenes and all the relevant data is then pre-populated. So they only see the result on this next form they progress to. The blue ones essentially facilitate some document automation. So if we were to progress with this workflow and then generate the partner agreement using all the relevant information captured or pulled from Salesforce, that will be facilitated by blue blocks. And they also allow you to sort of facilitate the e-signature. And finally, black ones, they're usually more in terms of the facilitating the workflow process and the process in general. They're your starting blocks, end blocks, workflow transitions, parallel workflows, and also some nice things like sectioning. So you can outline sections so the user know where they are in the process.
Very cool. So all the colors actually mean something in the process. So as you said before, the app will know exactly what type of outcome is expected from each block.
Exactly right.
Very, very cool. Mate, question that's on everyone's lips. Episode 5. What are we seeing? You got to hit me with something else. We've seen Salesforce a little bit too much for the last couple of episodes. You've got to have something new for me, man.
You see through me. So exactly to avoid death by Salesforce, and we really like this system, but enough is enough. We're going to actually change things up and show an alternative way to facilitate an integration between different systems. So the data import from another system, or perhaps a little bit of that RPA capability where you can automatically execute different checkbox workflows in bulk. And we're going to use CSV import for that to either export data in or facilitated RPA functionality. So hopefully you are all excited for it and something a little bit different.
Absolutely, mate. I mean, as much as I love talking about Salesforce, I think, let's keep it relevant. I know RPA is the flavor for the last little while, given the current situation that most people are in. So let's start focusing on a few other things. So I'm very, very eager to see what's going to happen in our next episode. But mate, once again, as always, thank you for spending the time with me, and not only myself, but also the guys out there, just to spend a little moment talking about the technical aspects associated with Checkbox, mate. Until then, speak to you soon, dude. Stay safe.
Likewise, man. Speak soon. Stay strong and good luck with the lockdown.